What transforms a soldier into something more terrifying than the enemies he once fought? How does a man who once held a rifle in the desert grow into a leader accused of cruelty, corruption, and tyranny? And why does Benjamin Netanyahu's name echo across the world as both a protector and a destroyer? Welcome to the Time Lens. Before we unravel this disturbing journey, make sure to subscribe, because what you're about to hear is not just politics, it is the anatomy of power, ambition, and cruelty. Benjamin Netanyahu. The Bibi was born in 1949 in a world of ashes and fire. Israel was barely a year old, born through bloodshed and surrounded by enemies. His father, Benjamin Netanyahu, was not just a historian, but a man obsessed with survival and nationalism. In this household, there was no room for softness, no room for weakness. From his earliest days, Bibi was raised in the shadow of conflict, taught that the world would never forgive nor forget. It forged in him a steel-hard belief: Israel must be strong, and he must be stronger. At 18, Netanyahu joined the Israel Defense Forces, entering the Sayeret Matkal, the most secretive and lethal commando unit Israel had. This was no ordinary posting. It was an initiation into the brutal underworld of covert warfare, sabotage, assassinations, and night raids where silence and cruelty were as valuable as courage. Netanyahu became a lieutenant, a leader of men whose lives depended on split-second decisions. He was respected, yes, but never loved. He carried himself with a coldness that unnerved even his comrades. In 1969, on a mission along the Suez Canal, he was shot in the shoulder. Blood spilled, pain seared through his body, but he refused to be broken. He returned after recovery, more determined, more ruthless. To Netanyahu, pain was proof that he was chosen for harder tasks than others. But behind the uniform, behind the medals, there lurked ambition. He did not want to remain a soldier in someone else's command. He wanted to command everything. The turning point came in 1976, not on the battlefield, but through tragedy. His elder brother, Yonatan Netanyahu, was killed during the Entebbe hostage rescue operation in Uganda. Yonatan was the only Israeli commando to die in that daring raid. For the state of Israel, Yonatan became a legend, a martyr carved into the nation's memory. For Benjamin, the death was both wound and weapon. He would forever carry his brother's image, invoking it at every chance, wrapping himself in the heroism of a man who could no longer speak for himself. The world would see him not just as Benjamin, but as the brother of a fallen savior. Did he cherish Yonatan's sacrifice, or exploit it? Even today, the question haunts his story. Benjamin left Israel for the United States, studying at MIT and Harvard. In the polished halls of academia, he learned something more dangerous than combat: the language of power, the art of persuasion. He spoke fluent English, charming American audiences, convincing them that Israel's battles were their own. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a salesman of fear and survival. By the late 1980s, he returned to Israel, stepping directly into politics. In the Likud party, he moved with the precision of a knife, cutting down rivals, whispering in shadows, and building his image as the defender of Israel. To his enemies, he was ambitious to the point of obsession, a man who would betray even allies to climb one step higher. To his supporters, he was the man who would keep Israel safe from annihilation. In 1996, in the aftermath of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's assassination and a wave of Palestinian-Israeli bloodshed, Netanyahu rose to the top. He became prime minister, the youngest in Israel's history. Many expected moderation, a chance for peace, a chance for healing. But peace was not Netanyahu's weapon. Fear was. He built his power on paranoia, on constant reminders of enemies within and enemies beyond. His first term was marked by harsh crackdowns, land seizures, and broken negotiations. The world watched as he tightened his grip on the occupied territories, as Palestinians lived under the shadow of checkpoints, walls, and military raids. Inside Israel, the people began to divide, those who saw him as their shield, and those who saw him as a tyrant who fed on division. Netanyahu did not mind the division. Division was power. By the end of the 1990s, the shine of his first reign dulled. Israelis grew weary. They voted him out. For most leaders, it would have been the end. But Netanyahu was not most leaders. For him, defeat was a pause, not a conclusion. The soldier had become a politician. The politician had become prime minister. And the prime minister had become something darker. Yet his story was far from finished. In 2009, Netanyahu reclaimed the prime minister's seat. But this was not the young leader of the 1990s. This was a man who had been humiliated once and who swore he would never let it happen again. He no longer wanted to lead. He wanted to dominate. His strategy was terrifyingly effective. He created fear as a constant atmosphere. Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, threats were never ending. Enemies were everywhere. And Netanyahu alone could protect Israel. He divided his people, turning citizen against citizen. The left were traitors, the Arabs were dangers, even secular Jews were suspect. He built an empire of paranoia, and through it all, he clung to power with claws that dug deep into the nation's democracy. Laws bent around him, institutions weakened before him. The media became a weapon rather than a watchdog. During these years, Gaza was bombed relentlessly. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, children pulled from debris, civilians trapped in endless cycles of fear. Internationally, Netanyahu boasted of strength. At home, he spoke of survival. But in truth, survival meant his own. Corruption wrapped itself around him like a second skin. Bribery, fraud, breach of trust. He was indicted, exposed, dragged before the courts. But still he refused to step down. To Netanyahu, the law was not a system to respect. It was an obstacle to crush. Every charge became a battle, every trial a chance to paint himself as a victim of conspiracies. His grip on power did not weaken, it grew stronger. On the streets of Israel, anger boiled. Protesters flooded Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, crying for democracy, for justice, for freedom. Netanyahu answered not with compromise, but with contempt. His speeches turned darker, his words sharper. Journalists were liars, protesters were anarchists, opponents were traitors. His voice was not the voice of a statesman. It was the growl of a ruler terrified of losing his throne. The mask of the polished diplomat was gone. What remained was something more sinister. A man who would see his nation burn before letting go of power. His cruelty was no longer hidden. It was his weapon, his armor, his legacy. To his supporters, he is still a hero, the guardian who stood between Israel and destruction. To his critics, he is a tyrant who drained the soul of democracy, who ruled with fear and manipulation unmatched in Israeli history. So, who is the real Netanyahu? A soldier scarred by loss, shaped by tragedy, and hardened by war, or a ruthless prime minister who betrayed his people for ambition? Perhaps he is both. Perhaps the tragedy is that Israel's greatest survivor became its most dangerous ruler. From lieutenant in the shadows of war to a prime minister cloaked in cruelty, Netanyahu's journey is a warning. It is the story of how power twists, how fear corrodes, and how ambition consumes. But what do you think? Was he a protector or a destroyer? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget, subscribe to The Time Lens, because history is not just the past, it is the mirror of today.